All right, I believe we are on the air. I am Bruce Tudor from the California Air Resources Board. I work in our compliance assistance and outreach programs. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This particular webinar is aimed at the specifics for state and local government fleets in the Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation. If you are not in one of those fleets, it still may be helpful for you. However, this is the third, pardon me, in a series of webinars. The three main parts of that Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation are high priority fleets, drayage trucks, and state and local government. And we have already had webinars which you can access recordings of for state and local, for high priority fleets and drayage fleets. And again, we will have these again, but the recordings are there and they're very, very useful. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. What we will be doing today is we will be going through a presentation. Followed by that, we will have a Q&A time. And I know that we have taken in a number of questions before the webinar today, and we will be prioritizing some of those and answering some of those. I will let Yusuf give you a little more information on using things such as the chat feature or the Q&A feature. In addition, make sure and watch the chat because we may be dropping some links in that will be helpful links. My understanding is there's a link here and there in some of the slides that may not be a good link anymore. Again, we will be dropping those into chat. I think that's about it to start. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Yusuf Sardo.
Thank you, Bruce. Welcome everyone to California Air Resources Board State and Local Government Agency Fleet Requirements Training Webinar. Again, my name is Yusuf Zardo. I'm an air pollution specialist here at CARB, and I work in the compliance assistance and outreach section. I will be going over today's presentation. However, I also have several CARB staff helping me today. So let's go through a quick round of introductions. Let's start with Brandon.
Hey everybody, Brandon Rose, Compliance Assistance and Outreach staff.
Thank you.
And I'll be doing the helping with the Q&A today.
Thank you, Brandon. Olivia?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia Lane. I'll be dropping helpful links in the chat throughout the meeting today. So if we reference a web page, you can go over to the webinar chat and click on the link. It'll be helpful to open those links during the meeting because you won't have access to that chat once the meeting is closed. So you might want to open up all the links and then save them in your in your favorites or something in your browser to look at later. Yeah, all right, I'll hand it over to Chris next.
Hi there, Chris Franceschi, air pollution specialist. I'll be assisting with the Q&A.
Thanks, Chris. Let's go to Molly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Munns, air pollution specialist here at CARB, and I'm going to be answering your questions in the Q&A.
Then we'll go to Duncan.
My name is Duncan Fry. I'm an air pollution specialist in the Compliance and Outreach branch, here to answer your questions about Clean Truck Check.
Thank you, Duncan. And Brianna.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brianna Rocha. I'm an air pollution specialist in the Compliance Assistance and Outreach section with Yusuf, and I'll be managing the presentation today.
Great. Thank you, Brianna. So I wanted to mention a few notes about today's format. This webinar is scheduled to go from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. The Zoom webinar is also being recorded and will be posted on our website once it has been approved. Today's presentation will be focused on the state and local government agency fleet requirements portion of the Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation. Unfortunately, we will not be taking any live questions during today's presentation. However, if you have clarifying questions relating to state and local government agency fleet requirements that will be covered today, you can use the Q&A to ask those questions. A quick note about asking questions in the Q&A. We would like to provide you with the best possible response. So when asking questions in the Q&A, please try to write complete sentences so that we can understand your question and provide a thorough answer. Today's presentation will be broken up into two parts. The first half of the presentation will cover state and local government agency requirements, ZEV purchase requirements, ZEV purchase schedule, ZEV milestones, and vehicle types. The second half will cover provisions, reporting requirements, and a few slides on our Clean Truck Check program. So if you have any questions about the second half of the presentation, please hold off on asking those questions until that section is done. We also have questions that were submitted during the registration period, and we'll try to answer those questions at the end of each section. We have a lot of folks attending today's presentation, so we may not be able to get to everyone's questions. If you did not hear your question answered during today's webinar, you can email us at zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. I will post that link or that email at the end of the presentation. As Bruce mentioned in the beginning, this is our third training webinar on advanced clean fleets. The first was on the drayage portion component of the advanced clean fleets. The second was the high priority fleets component, and today is the state and local government component of advanced clean fleets. Those recordings for those webinars are posted and can be viewed through our meetings and events link on our main advanced clean fleets webpage. Next slide, please. Okay, first I wanted to mention that advanced clean fleets regulation has four main components which complement each other. On manufacturers, a 100% zero emission sales requirement, and three fleet requirement categories on drayage trucks, high priority fleets, state and local government fleets. The state and local government agency fleet covers a city, county, public utility, special district, local agency or district, or a public agency of the state of California, and any department, division, public corporation, or public agency of the state of California. This includes public universities as well. It is important to note that this regulation is phased in over the course of the next 2 decades, and all combustion-powered vehicles are guaranteed their full useful life. The move to cleanest available technology will not happen overnight. Next slide, please. So here's a rundown of what we'll be covering today. We'll be going over the state and local government requirements, the ZEV milestones options, the zero emission vehicle purchase requirements, the ZEV milestones groups, state and local government fleet provisions. We'll go over the reporting requirements, as well as cover a few slides on Clean Truck Check. Next slide, please. So we'll start with a slide on applicability. The state and local government agency fleet requirements applies to any agency with jurisdiction in California that owns, leases, or operates one or more vehicles that have a gross vehicle weight rating greater than 8,500 pounds. Typically, this will include a 3/4 ton vehicle and larger. The state and local government fleet regulation also applies to hiring entities such as motor carriers, brokers, governmental agencies, persons or entities that hire and operate or hire and direct the operation of vehicles in California. Next slide, please. Some common questions we get are related to which vehicles are included in the regulation. Light duty cars, pickups, or other vehicles that do not meet the definition of a light duty package delivery vehicle are not included in the regulation. This means you cannot buy zero emission vehicle sedans or certain light duty zero-emission vehicle pickups to count as compliant vehicles. Converting a vehicle from combustion to zero-emission does count as a compliant vehicle. And near zero-emission vehicles, NZEVs, with a 2035 or older model year count the same as a ZEV to provide more flexibility. Near zero emission vehicles are defined. Near zero emissions as defined must meet a minimum all electric range. Natural gas vehicles that do not achieve an all electric range are not considered NZEVs for the purposes of advanced clean fleets. Next slide, please. Okay, we talked about vehicles subject to the state and local government agency fleet requirement. The vehicles listed on this slide are ones that are excluded from the state and local government agency fleet requirement. Since these vehicles are excluded, none of them need to be reported or included in the fleet counts. They are treated as if they do not exist for compliance purposes. A common question we get is whether a public works vehicle is excluded from the regulation. Public works vehicles are not considered excluded vehicles, therefore subject to the state local government agency fleet requirements. Next slide, please. When it comes to the advanced clean fleet regulation, it's important to understand the zero emission vehicle definition. So the regulation states a zero emission vehicle, it means a vehicle with a zero emissions powertrain that produces zero exhaust emissions of any criteria pollutant or precursor pollutant or greenhouse gas under any possible operational mode or condition. So zero emission vehicles include a battery electric vehicle, hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles, or near zero emission vehicles or NZEVs. Again, a near zero emission vehicle is a plug-in hybrid which can achieve a minimum all electric range. Lastly, it is important to note that hybrid vehicles are not considered zero emission vehicles. Next slide, please. Okay, for state and local government fleets, the default option is a zero emission purchase requirement that aligns with public purchasing cycles. Starting in 2024 through 2026, 50% of purchases need to be zero emissions. That means the other half can be combustion powered until 2027. Note that near zero emission vehicles or NZEVs can be purchased equally to full zero emission vehicles to provide more flexibility. In this situation, all purchases made would need to be zero emissions or near zero emissions starting on January 1st, 2027. Next, we have an extension for agencies that are in designated counties. See map here on the right. The agencies will remain exempt from zero emission purchase requirement until 2027. This exemption has also been granted to divisions that have 10 or fewer vehicles. However, agencies or divisions subject to this requirement will still need to meet the reporting requirements set in the regulation. In this compliance structure, if no vehicles are being purchased, then no action is required. This means that fleets can continue to operate their vehicles as long as they wish. One common question we received was whether advanced clean fleets regulation affects municipal fleets. And the answer is yes, all public fleets are affected. Next slide, please. Some practical considerations are helpful to understand the zero emission vehicle purchase schedule. Existing compliant combustion vehicles have no useful life retirement requirement and can operate indefinitely. Any purchases not delivered before January 1st compliance date cannot be included in the ZEV purchase requirement. Any zero emission vehicles that are purchased early or over the 50% requirement will count 1-for-1 towards any future combustion purchase. The zero emission vehicle purchase schedule allows fleet compliance to be assessed at the end of the year for all purchases made during the calendar year. There are several flexibility provisions in this regulation that require fleet owners to request the extension or exemption no earlier than when the model year of the internal combustion engine vehicle being replaced reaches 13 years old. Lastly, you must report in the truckers database by April 1st, 2024. This includes agencies in designated counties I mentioned on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is the ZEV milestones option or phase-in schedule. This option provides flexibility to comply regardless of a truck age or mileage. The option is based on the truck body type, and fleets must meet the milestones as a percentage of the California fleet. Fleets still have the flexibility to add new or used internal combustion engine vehicles, although they do have to meet the cleanest requirements. You can opt into the ZEV milestones option until January 1st of 2030, but a fleet must waive the right to statutory useful life option for its vehicles when doing so. And note, this option is open to both high priority fleets and state and local government fleets. Next slide, please. Fleets using the ZEV milestones option can add new or used internal combustion engine vehicles as long as the ZEV milestones are met. Used vehicles added must have a 2010 or newer model year engines. New internal combustion engine vehicles purchased in California already must have engines meeting California certification. Out of state, new vehicle purchases for primary use out of California must be 50 states certified for 2024 and 2025 model year engines. Again, we've developed a fact sheet that provides information regarding this topic. Olivia has dropped a link in the chat, but there's a link on this slide as well. Next slide, please. So this slide shows in the phase-in schedule for the ZEV milestones option separated by milestone groups. Let's run through the table in more detail and give you an example. You can see we have 3 groups of vehicles with different dates. For group 1, it's box trucks, vans, 2-axle buses, yard trucks, and postage delivery trucks. For group 2, it's work trucks, day cabs, tractors, 3-axle buses, and pickups. For group 3, it's sleeper cab, tractors, and certain specialty vehicles. So you can see the requirement phases in over time. Starting in 2025, the group 1 vehicles have a 10% requirement. If you do not have any of these vehicles, then there is no replacement requirement. Then group 2 and group 3 vehicles come in at 10% for 2027 and 2030. So if you have a sleeper cab, over-the-road tractor, the requirements don't affect you until January 1st, 2030. As you can see, the phase-in requirement goes all the way out to 2042. We have an example of some numbers on the next slide. Specialty vehicles are defined as Class 8 vehicles with a heavy front axle, or Class 8 vehicles that are designated to perform work that can only be done while the vehicle is stationary and are not designated to carry cargo. Any vehicles that are not in Group 1 or Group 3, as described, are in Group 2. Next slide, please. So this slide illustrates how the ZEV milestone schedule is applied to a mixed fleet of 100 vehicles. Here we have 60 Group 1 vehicles, 20 Group 2 vehicles, and 20 Group 3 vehicles. On the bottom row, we can see the number of zero-emission vehicles required in each year. So for 2025, this fleet would need 10% of the vehicles to be ZEVs. So 60 times 10% is equal to 6 vehicles. Skipping forward to 2029, there would be 15 Group 1 and 2 Group 2 vehicles required. You can see it's phased in over time. It doesn't matter what type of vehicles they are. In other words, any 6 zero-emission vehicles will meet the first milestones requirement for this example. Also, note that this example does not include every single compliance year for the fleet, like 2027 for Group 2. In addition, a note about calculations. We use the 0.5 rounding rule. So 0.5 of a truck would round up to 1. Let's say you have 10 vehicles and a 25% requirement. That equals to 2.5 trucks, which will be rounded up to 3 trucks. We do have a fleet calculator posted on our website to help you with those calculations. Next slide, please. So we frequently get questions about how to classify vehicles for zero emission for the ZEV milestones option. The following slides cover some guidance we have developed to assist in making that determination. All milestones group body types are defined in the regulation language. You can reference section 2015B to see the definitions. Also, the work truck category is a catch-all for anything that does not meet the other defined terms. We will describe these in more detail in the next few slides. Most questions we get are related to whether a vehicle is a specialty vehicle, a work truck, or a box truck. So let's go over those. Next slide, please. So vans are typically in class 2B to class 3 range. Vans are certified by the vehicle manufacturer as complete vehicles and are typically sold as a passenger van with side windows or cargo van without side windows. Cutaways with a front end that looks like a van but cut open on the back are typically sold as incomplete vehicles or upfit with a body and are considered either a box truck or work truck. The images show which vehicles are considered vans, with the bottom image crossed out as it is a cutaway with a work truck body. Next slide. We most often get questions about whether a vehicle is a box truck, work truck, or specialty vehicle. So let's discuss what is a box truck. Box trucks are typically certified by the vehicle manufacturer as an incomplete vehicle or cab and chassis. Vehicles configured with a body originally designed for delivery of cargo, payload, or otherwise listed in the regulation definition of box truck. The regulation includes step vans, refrigerated vans, dry vans, chipper trucks, and box reefer trucks. However, combination trucks that have a box and some other configuration on the body are not considered box trucks. Some examples of this include chipper. Some examples of this include chipper trucks with a crane between the cab and chipper box, or a truck with a half box truck and half stake bed. These are considered work trucks. Also, use case is not considered. A box truck that is used for purposes other than its originally designed is still a box truck. For example, a work truck used to deliver something like baked goods is still a work truck. Next slide, please. So work trucks have a typical gross vehicle weight rating range between class 3 and class 8. These trucks are typically certified by the vehicle manufacturer as an incomplete vehicle or cab and chassis. Vehicles with a box body that are not originally designed for delivery of cargo or payload, or with equipment integrated into the body, or that are originally designed for and used for transporting tools and equipment to a job site, are not considered box trucks. Remember, the Advanced Clean Fleet's definition of configuration looks at the primary intended function of the vehicle and the equipment integrated into the body to help make that determination. Things like lift gates and similar low voltage systems are not integrated equipment. Integration typically includes power or hydraulic lines routed through the vehicle. It would not include self-contained aftermarket equipment like standalone generator or standalone air compressor that happens to be bolted on the body of the truck rather than strapped down. For example, PTO powered equipment that is integrated into the body is a good indicator that a vehicle may be a work truck. Other trucks that meet this definition include scissor lift trucks, curtain side trucks, utility service body trucks, construction trucks, and tank or dump trucks, as well as many others. Next slide, please.
Hey, Yusuf, are we on the right slide? We have people in the Q&A saying we're a slide behind.
I think we're on slide 3 or milestones 3, right? Thank you, Brandon. Specialty vehicles are either a vehicle with a gross vehicle weight rating greater than 33,000 pounds and with a heavy front axle, for example, a front-loading refuse trucks, or a vehicle with a gross vehicle weight rating greater than 33,000 pounds that is not designated to carry cargo and is configured to perform work that can only be done while the vehicle is stationary. An auxiliary mechanism to perform that work is an integral part of the vehicle's design. Examples include vehicles commonly known as vacuum trucks, digger derricks, drilling rigs, and concrete pump trucks. So to be considered a specialty vehicle, it has to be a class 8 vehicle and either have a heavy front axle rated to exceed 12,500 pounds or be configured to perform work that can only be done while the vehicle is stationary. Vehicles that meet this definition but are not Class 8 would generally be in the work truck category. Next slide, please. Some practical considerations are helpful to understand the ZEV milestones option. Fleets must identify all vehicles they expect to operate in California for the calendar year as part of their annual report. Vehicles that are sold, scrapped, or otherwise no longer owned are immediately excluded from the milestone count on the date of removal. Any vehicle being upfit by the fleet owner is not considered added to the California fleet until placed in service. A fleet owner can replace vehicles without impacting fleet size. Also, vehicles can be replaced or lease renewals or buyouts can occur without impacting fleet size. Lastly, fleet owners have to show that no other combustion vehicle in the fleet can be upgraded to zero-emission vehicle before exemptions can be granted. Next slide, please. So state and local government agencies have the option to comply jointly with the ZEV milestones option instead of complying independently if the combined California fleet meets the requirements. The California Department of General Services may comply jointly with all state agency fleets under its jurisdiction and must exclude vehicles in subdivisions that opt to comply separately. Fleet owners may comply jointly even if one or more individual subdivisions opt into the ZEV milestones option. If state and local government agencies elect to utilize this compliance option and then subsequently do not fully comply with any requirement in the ZEV milestones option, each of the participating entities must then demonstrate compliance with the requirements of the ZEV milestones option on an individual basis. So this is at about the halfway point. We'll go ahead and stop for about 30 minutes and have Brandon go over some of the questions that were submitted. And if you have any questions in the Q&A, go ahead and drop those in. And then after that, we'll come back and continue on with the rest of the presentation. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to Brandon.
All right, thanks, Yusuf. We'll jump on, and what I'm going to do is run through the questions that relate to this first half of the presentation that were submitted in written form at registration, and then we'll go back and forth with Chris Franceschi here. And then we'll go through, I've been copying and pasting, I think, some of the more general questions for everybody. And so we'll jump over to the questions we'll be getting live after we go through what we received written. So, and I'm going to try to generally follow the order of the presentation. So the first group of questions I'm going to go through is about the light duty vehicles, and then some of the vehicle exemptions. So first one is about pickup trucks, and it says on the page Advanced Clean Fleet Regulations ZEV milestone option details. First paragraph states which vehicles are included or excluded in the ZEV milestone options. Only vehicles that have a gross vehicle weight rating greater than 8,500 pounds are light duty package delivery vehicles or are yard trucks and that are operated in California are included in the ZEV's milestone option. But then it says, but down on the wage in the milestones group 2, it says pickup trucks have a standard open box type pickup bed not exceeding 9 feet in length and a GVWR of less than 11,500 pounds. says, can you explain this so we know if our basic Ford F-150 truck is included? And so I think that's really, Chris, that's also a long way of sort of asking, hey, what's considered light, and is my pickup truck considered light as well? Can you maybe help clarify how we treat pickup trucks versus the package delivery vehicles?
Yeah, there's a couple questions that are kind of similar permutations of this. Essentially, the vehicle scope of the regulation language sets boundaries around what we expect people to report on and comply with for the California fleet. For people using the default ZEV purchase schedule, the vehicle scope includes any vehicle with a GVWR over 8,500 pounds. If you're using the ZEV milestones option instead, it's any vehicle over 8,500 pounds, any vehicle that meets the regulations definition of a light duty package delivery vehicle, and any on or off-road yard tractors. In terms of the pickups, so we do use a definition for pickup, which points to a vehicle code definition, which does include GVWR less than 11,500, but that is modified by the vehicle scope. So any pickups that are over 8,500 but less than 11,500 pounds GVWR would be included in the pickup definition, if that makes sense. And generally, this covers a different question we got in chat. When you're reporting and complying, depending on the compliance option you select, you should only be reporting and complying for vehicles that are described in the vehicle scope section. So again, it's only reporting or complying for your California fleet of vehicles over 8,500 pounds GVWR, not including light duty vehicles, unless you're using the ZEV milestones option, in which case you just include the light duty package delivery vehicles. But all other light duty vehicles should not be reported and you should not include in your compliance calculations.
Okay, perfect. We'll have a couple more. One of them, I don't know how much we want to get into this, but it says, why doesn't this regulation allow offset purchases to be any ZEV or NZEV, including vehicles less than 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight rating? Would targeting lighter vehicles make more sense? And then it says, unfortunately, most configurations of the F-150 Lightning do not meet the 8,500 pound requirement.
Yeah, this goes to any questions that people have about our reasonings for why we wrote the way that we wrote the rule. You can see our rulemaking documents on our posts on our website. We have an initial statement of reasons. We have a number of appendixes describing the rationale and reason that we wrote things the way we did, why we're covering only vehicles over 8,500 GVWR and not covering vehicles under. So all that information is in our rulemaking history. So I invite anybody who's interested in those answers to those kinds of questions to go please read the rulemaking documents.
Yeah.
In terms of telling whether or not the F-150 Lightning meets the 8,500 mark, the extended range battery, I believe, goes over 8,500 pounds. But yeah, the base models would fall under 8,500 pounds from my understanding.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I would also add, we have the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, which covers these lighter vehicles. And then this actual ACF rule, it does target a lot of the lighter, smaller vehicles initially in these first years and delay some of the, like the Class 8 sleeper cabs over the road. So we do follow sort of that structure. Let me jump to the next one. We have a couple questions about just basic applicability and some of the exemptions that Yusuf talked about. And it says, I understand that fire equipment is exempt from this regulation according to Vehicle Code Section 165. Does fire equipment need to be reported with the rest of the fleet, or should it not be included on your truckers reporting list?
Yeah, any vehicles that are included in the list of exempt vehicle types, so that includes your emergency vehicles as defined in the Vehicle Code Section 165, including other types of vehicles like historical vehicles or certain two-engine vehicles. None of those need to be reported and none of those need to be complied with. So if you have fire equipment or police equipment, you do not need to include those in your report because they are exempt from the regulation. They are exempt from all parts of the regulation, including the reporting part.
Perfect for that. And then just a reminder, folks, maybe just do a quick Google search if you're curious what like CVC Section 165 says, and it's a list of different applicability criteria. Here's another one that says, I found an article on the CARB website that said vehicles with two engines, like a vacuum truck, are exempt from the regulation. Is this information still current? So a little bit about the 2-engine vehicles, maybe specialty vehicles.
Yeah, and I'll read off the definition of 2-engine vehicle. It's a little bit long, but effectively any vehicles that meet this definition that I'm about to read out are exempt from the regulation. So a 2-engine vehicle is a specially constructed on-road mobile vehicle that was designed by the original equipment manufacturer to be equipped with 2 engines, one engine providing the primary source of motive power, while the other engine is an auxiliary engine with at least 50 brake horsepower or greater that is permanently attached and integrated into the original design of the vehicle to perform a specific function, which may include providing auxiliary power to attachments, performing special job functions, or providing additional motive power. If a vehicle was originally designed with the capability to have an auxiliary engine installed, but that engine was installed by somebody other than the OEM, such as an upfitter, the vehicle still qualifies as a 2-engine vehicle, and 2-engine street sweepers are not covered by this definition. So 2-engine street sweepers are included in the regulation, but other 2-engine vehicles that meet this definition are not. So this would be things like believe Vector or certain vacuum pump trucks that have 2 engines, you know, some very heavy equipment that's used vocationally may have 2 engines, but generally those are the types of vehicles we're including here.
Perfect. I think that helps clear things up with that. This is one of the live questions we got, but I thought maybe it's worth asking. Can you just clarify what the yard goats? The yard goat that is off-road and not allowed on the road and is not registered. And
Yeah.
we touched on it, but why don't you give it one more time since there's a lot of these out there.
Yeah, so those are included by definition in the regulation. So a yard tractor is defined in the regulation. We also include them in the vehicle scope section. So on and off-road yard tractors, including off-road yard tractors with off-road certified engines that are not registered, that don't have license plates or safety lights or things like that. Those are included in this regulation.
Thanks for that. I think that's important for people to understand. The next set of questions were a bit about vehicle availability. And so I've heard that vehicle manufacturers are pulling out of the electric market. Does CARB expect that vehicle manufacturers will meet market demand from the ACF regulation?
So every major manufacturer of medium and heavy duty vehicles has a zero emission vehicle offering or a product in the works. We can't speculate on reasons for manufacturer market decisions. We are here to answer questions about the regulation. The Advanced Clean Trucks and Advanced Clean Fleets regulation both ensure a supply of medium and heavy duty ZEVs in California, and that'll ramp up from 2024 through 2036. You can also get a sense of the breadth of available vehicles by checking out our California HVIP list, which is vehicles that are eligible for the HVIP voucher incentive program. But that's generally a good starter list to try to identify the types of vehicles that are out there as ZEVs.
So here's sort of a more specific question on that. In order to comply with the regulation, is the state aware of any vehicle manufacturers that are producing dump trucks, crane trucks, compressor trucks, or other utility vehicles that will be ready for purchase by 2024?
Not off the top of my head, but best thing we could suggest to fleets is to contact the Cal Fleet Advisor for if you need some one-on-one consulting services, help finding vehicles, help identifying manufacturers. That'd be a good place to start.
And then the second half of the presentation includes some of the exemptions. And so I was planning to do a little bit deeper dive into like, hey, what if there's no vehicles available, exemptions in that side today, just FYI for those listening. Then it says, let me hold off on that one. Let me go down to some of the purchase requirements. So it says if we need to replace an engine, for example, like this one's, for example, 2015 light duty pickup truck, is that equivalent to buying a new vehicle? What about a heavier vehicle? Is an engine replacement considered a purchase? And so,
yeah, this is a good question. We haven't gotten this one too often before, but I think this is a good one to cover. So the question relates to a light duty pickup truck. So what we discussed before about the regulation only applying to vehicles over 8,500 pounds. Assuming this vehicle is under 8,500 pounds, the regulation would not apply at all. If it is over 8,500 pounds, then replacing an engine in a vehicle would be allowed and would not be counted as a new vehicle purchase. The regulation specifies the actions that constitute a new vehicle purchase that would need to be offset with a ZEV purchase in the definition of vehicle purchase. Without reading the whole thing off, effectively it covers new purchases, a purchase of a used vehicle, or a purchase of a leased vehicle, or a purchase where you are having somebody convert an existing combustion vehicle to a ZEV. The definition does not cover just simply replacing an engine in an existing vehicle. So again, this would not be considered a new vehicle purchase. It would just be replacing the engine in an existing vehicle. And this applies to the, again, the ZEV purchase schedule and ZEV milestones option.
One of the live questions that I flagged related to purchasing is about the timing of purchasing. Right, if I order my vehicle in 2023, but I don't get it delivered until 2024, Chris, could you maybe say a little bit more about that? Like,
Yeah. So when we're looking at determining whether or not a fleet met its 50% purchase requirement, we're looking at any purchases that are placed during a calendar year. So in the example, you say you placed your order in 2023, that doesn't count against your 2024 requirement. We just look at when the purchase order was placed. So if you have a signed, dated, firm purchase order, we're looking at the date of that purchase order. And so it doesn't matter when the vehicle is delivered. You could have it purchased in 2023 and delivered in 2027. It's not going to count against your 2027 requirement because you purchased it in 2023. Now, if you purchased it this year in 2024, obviously the 50% requirement is in effect. So you would need to offset any purchases made this year with a ZEV in order to stay in compliance with that requirement.
Okay, thank you for that. And then we have some questions. This was more related to the milestone schedule as well. And it says for engine model years, when the advancing fleet uses the term model year engine, is that the manufacturer's year on the engine, or is that the model year of vehicles? Real basic key. Is it the model year of the truck or the engine in the truck?
That's the model year of the manufacturer, of the engine manufacturer. So you can find that by looking at the emissions control label on your engine, and the emissions control label will have what year the engine was manufactured to.
Okay, so make sure you check the label on your engine. Is always key. That's been key for a very long time with our regulations. This one is a little bit about, I think we maybe touched on it, about lighter vehicles and milestones, and it's detailed. It says, we presently possess 16 vehicles subject to the ACF regulation. I'm seeking clarification on the milestones option. If I opt to eliminate an F-250 from our fleet and acquire an F-150 instead, would this adjustment contribute to meeting our required fleet percentage?
Yeah, so basically the question is, if you're in the ZEV milestones option, if you have, let's just say 100 vehicles to keep it simple, and you remove one of them and replace it with a light duty vehicle that's not subject to the regulation. So effectively your calculation for milestones is now based on 99 vehicles instead of 100. Conversely, if you purchase a ZEV that is a light duty vehicle not covered by the regulation, it does not count towards your compliance requirements. So you'd still effectively be a 99 vehicle fleet with 0 ZEVs if you replaced your one vehicle with a ZEV that's not included in the scope of the regulation.
Those were all of the written questions related to this half of the presentation. Chris, I wrote down maybe half a dozen questions that we answered in the Q&A. Are you okay with me running through a few of those, since I think they might be useful for everybody to hear, or do you want to keep going? We can do either way.
When we answer it in the Q&A, does the answer not go out to everybody? So I think everybody should have the answer to all the questions that we
click the box.
Yeah.
On your not meeting that closely. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just take a peek about some of the ones, if there's anything really key. Oh, Chris, can you maybe say this out loud? This one was, is it true that transit agencies comply with the innovative clean transit rule, but not this local government regulation? This was sort of an interesting. Could you maybe just clarify for everybody that difference between the ICT rule versus this ACF, Advanced Clean Fleet rule?
Yeah, so innovative clean transit applies to transit agencies and the transit buses within those transit agencies. So the buses that are subject to the innovative clean transit rule are exempt from ACF, so they do not need to be included when considering ACF's requirements. If you're using the default ZEV purchase schedule as a government entity, then any other vehicles owned by the transit agency that are not buses would be subject to this regulation, but not until January 1st of 2030. The regulation does have a delay for those vehicles that are in transit agencies but are not actual buses. They're just used to support the transit agency operations that would otherwise meet, the scope of this rule. Those vehicles, again, are delayed until January 1, 2030, so they do not need to be reported and do not need to be considered in any compliance requirements. But again, this is only for fleets using the ZEV purchase schedule, so if you opt to instead use the ZEV milestones option, that delay does not apply. However, obviously the buses are still exempt, but the other vehicles are not exempt until 2030 if using the milestones option.
I had one I wanted to bring up because it felt like it was really core, and it's which flexibility options require replacement of vehicles at least 13 years old. And so I was going to make sure that there's no confusion between the model year schedule and purchase and milestone requirements.
Yeah, so if using the ZEV purchase schedule, then the daily usage exemption, the ZEV infrastructure delay extension, and the ZEV purchase exemption would require you be replacing a vehicle that is at least 13 years old in order to qualify. If you're using the ZEV milestones option for the daily usage and ZEV purchase exemption, rather than being replacing a vehicle that's at least 13 years old, because that provision provides ultimate flexibility to comply with any vehicle in the fleet, you would have to show for, again, daily usage and ZEV purchase exemption that no other combustion vehicle in the fleet could be upgraded to a ZEV before being approved to use an exemption. The infrastructure delay does not have similar limitations if using the ZEV milestones option. So that one's a little bit more flexible.
We're going to jump into some of the exemptions in a little more detail in the second half in a couple minutes as well. Okay, I think that just a couple really basic ones. What grouping is a Class 8 dump truck in?
I linked a fact sheet to this person. Please see the fact sheet on ZEV milestones details for determining how that determination can be made.
Perfect, because you usually went through the several slides talking about which body type goes into which vehicle grouping. So go check out that fact sheet if you're sending confusion about what goes away. That's for sure. Okay. One second. So I wanted just to clarify the table, the milestones table a little bit. This one was for the ZEV milestone requirement. If you have 2 trucks total in group 1, when and how do you have to meet the 10% requirement? So sort of, can you maybe just give an example of how that calculation works?
Yeah, so you have 2 vehicles in group 1, so 10% of 2 is 0.2, which based on our standard rounding convention rounds down to 0, needed for 2025. The next milestone for group 1 is in 2028, where 25% of the fleet of the group 1 vehicles would need to be zero emission. So 25% of 2 is 0.5, which by a standard rounding convention rounds up to 1. So you would need 1 ZEV in the fleet by January 1, 2028 to meet your group 1 obligation if you have 2 vehicles in group 1. Perfect.
Thanks for that. And this thing is important for people to what Chris just said, right? The 0.5 rounding rules. You can do that quick math if you're sort of confused when is a requirement hit for your very specific situation. Okay. I think that is everything that we'll run through. I've not been able to look. There's about 30 or 40 Q&A that have come in as we've been going through it. So we'll let Yusuf go ahead and keep going, and we'll run through those and see if there's anything worth verbalizing, or we'll go through and answer them. We have a second. Okay, Yusuf, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. So the next half of the presentation, we'll go over the flexibility of some of the provisions, reporting requirements, and a little bit about clean truck check. So let's go ahead and get started. So here's a list of potentially relevant exemptions and extensions that could be used by state and local government fleets. When granted a ZEV purchase or daily use exemption, fleets must purchase new internal combustion engine vehicles that meet California's heavy-duty omnibus standard. These are the cleanest combustion engines available in the nation. When fleets who have a mutual aid agreements can reserve up to 25% of their fleet to remain exempt from the regulation requirements. They are eligible for this exemption once they exceed 25% ZEVs before 2030 or 50% before 2035. I'll touch on the ZEV purchase exemption as well as ZEV infrastructure delay extension in the next few slides. Please keep in mind these provisions are only granted for vehicles that are 13 years or older. Also, the asterisk means that the extension is not relevant to the default ZEV purchase schedule. However, it does pertain to optional ZEV milestones schedule. Next slide, please. In the event there is no available zero emission vehicle of the needed configuration to purchase, the fleet owner may request the zero emission vehicle purchase exemption. Fleet owners that purchase an internal combustion engine vehicle pursuant to the ZEV purchase exemption must submit an email to truckers@arb.ca.gov within 30 days of receiving the new internal combustion engine vehicle. Again, we've developed a fact sheet that goes into more detail on this topic. I believe Olivia will drop a link to that fact sheet as well in the chat. So feel free to go ahead and open it up and read more about it. Next slide, please. So we have two types of ZEV infrastructure delays. The first is when the utility cannot supply enough power to the site for the required ZEV, and this happens before construction begins. Extensions for utility-based delays before construction begins sunsets on January 1st, 2030. The second covers construction-related delays on a project where the construction permit was issued 1 year prior to the next applicable compliance date. And the delay is a result of any one of the following: delays in manufacture and shipping of zero-emission vehicle fueling infrastructure equipment, delays due to change of a general contractor, delays in obtaining power from a utility after construction begins, delays due to unexpected safety issues at the construction site, discovery of archaeological, historical, or tribal cultural resources, or natural disasters. Again, we have a fact sheet that dives more into this. If you'd like to read more about it, Olivia again will be dropping a link in the chat for that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, for waste and wastewater fleets, this option defers ZEV requirement to year 2030 for eligible waste and wastewater fleets that directly support the operation of facilities that collect and process diverted in-state organic waste to produce biomethane. To qualify for this option, eligible fleets must elect to use the ZEV milestones compliance pathway only. In addition, These vehicles must exclusively be fueled with biomethane. Again, a fact sheet has been developed to answer some of your questions, and the link is provided here in the slide. The transit agency exemption provides more time until ZEV purchases begin for maintenance and support vehicles, allowing transit agencies to focus efforts on electrifying the transit buses first. Next slide, please. Intermittent snow removal vehicle is a vehicle that is equipped with a snow plow or snow blower mounting attachment and control system for the snow plow or blower. As a result, those meeting the definition may purchase internal combustion engine vehicles until 2030. You must follow the exemption request process stated in the regulation. Again, we've developed a fact sheet on intermittent snow removal vehicles, and Olivia will drop a link on that in the chat as well for you guys. Next slide, please. So hiring and sales requirements. This regulation also has requirements for fleets that hire and operate or hire and direct the operation of vehicles subject to the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. Hiring entities must check if the fleet is compliant on CARB's website at the link provided on this slide. If the fleet does not show up and are not subject to the regulation, hiring fleets must obtain a signed statement from the fleet they hire stating that the fleet is not subject to Advanced Clean Fleets. Hiring entities must also provide a disclosure statement to the hired fleet and keep records of the disclosure and the hired fleet's certificate of reported compliance. Specific language is available in the regulation, and you can find more information on the regulation by visiting CARB's Advanced Clean Fleets webpage. Lastly, when selling a vehicle subject to Advanced Clean Fleets, fleet owners must provide a disclosure statement to the buyer that the vehicle may be subject to Advanced Clean Fleets. Specific language can be found in the regulation. Again, Olivia will be dropping a link that's on this slide in the chat for you all to have. Next slide, please. So some upcoming reporting dates for state and local government fleets. The initial reporting deadline is a mandatory. The initial reporting deadline is mandatory, and for state and local government fleets, it is due by April 1st, 2024. And each year on April 1st until 2045. Reporting must be done through CARB's online reporting system known as Truckers. Any changes to your fleet need to be reported within 30 days. Ongoing reporting requirements depend on category and situation. The milestones option I mentioned earlier can be selected in the reporting system each year. For state and local government fleets, you can switch between the ZEV milestones option and model year schedule until 2030, but you need to stay compliant at all times to do so. Next slide, please. So this slide shows what the truckers reporting page will look like. As I mentioned, the state and local government trucks need to be reported using the truckers online reporting database as shown from the login page on this slide. New users will need to create a new account. Existing users can use existing usernames and passwords. You can reset your password if you forgot it using the links provided on the truckers website page. If you run into any logging issues, you can email us at truckers arb.ca.gov or call us at 1-866-634-3735. Also, we have a new reporting user guide that has step-by-step instructions on what is required to be reported in the truckers database. The link listed to the new user, the link is listed in the new user account column, and the link is also titled Truckers User Guide, as shown on this slide. So the column on the very left side that says new users, under create new account, you'll have the user guide, which is Truckers User Guide. We've recently updated that user guide, has step-by-step instructions and screenshots on what's required to be reported in the truckers reporting system. I encourage you to go to that link. I believe Olivia also dropped a link in the chat that will take you there, and read through that as we have some updated information on that. Next slide, please. Again, here is a screenshot of the landing page after you log in, the truckers online database, and the address to the page. This link is right off the Advanced Clean Fleet's main web page and will take you to the registration and reporting page. Again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have new reporting guide that is available and gives you step-by-step instructions and screenshots to help you with the reporting. Next slide, please. Okay, AB 1594. Modifications shall authorize public agency utilities to purchase replacements for traditional utility specialized vehicles that are at the end of life as determined by State Air Resources Board in consultation with public agency utilities when needed to maintain reliable service and respond to major foreseeable events, including but not limited to severe weather, wildfires, natural disasters, and physical attacks, without regard to the model year of the vehicle being replaced. For the purposes of determining the daily usage of a minimum or heavy-duty vehicle, a public agency utility may provide comprehensive usage data for a class of vehicles that does not exclusively rely on the lowest mileage reading and does not exclude the highest usage days. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go into Clean Truck Check, as I mentioned earlier. I've included in this presentation a few slides on the Clean Truck Check program. We often get a lot of questions regarding Clean Truck Check. So I wanted to take a few minutes just to go over some of the basic requirements. Again, Clean Truck Check requirements are based on the Heavy Duty Vehicle Inspection and Maintenance Program regulation, which with requirements that started January of 2023. If an owner of potential high emitting vehicle receives a notice to submit testing, they must submit a passing compliance test to CARB enforcement to stay compliant. The older periodic smoke inspection program is still in effect, and vehicles subject to that regulation still must perform their annual opacity test. The periodic smoke inspection program will remain in effect until Clean Truck Check periodic testing requirements take effect. Clean Truck Check is intended to help ensure that heavy-duty vehicles stay in good working condition. Next slide, please. Again, Clean Truck Check affects all non-gasoline fueled vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating over 14,000 pounds operating in California. This includes heavy-duty trucks tractor trailers, and buses operating in California, even if they are registered in another state or another country. This will level the playing field to make sure that a solution to dirty vehicle is not to register the vehicle in another state and keep operating on California roads. California registered motorhomes and agricultural vehicles are also subject to these regulations. The Clean Truck Check database opened for reporting in October and will affect vehicles, and affected vehicles must register and pay an annual compliance fee by the end of January 31st, 2024. Beginning in 2024, vehicles added or removed from the fleet must be reported within 30 days, and annual compliance fees are due each year before each vehicle's first compliance test deadline of that year. To comply with the periodic testing requirements beginning in 2024, a passing compliance emissions test would be required to be submitted to CARB for all vehicle compliance deadlines on or after July 1st, 2024. Next slide, please. So some of the requirements: vehicle owners subject to this requirement will be required to report vehicle information details into CARB's Clean Truck Check database by January 31st, 2024. In addition, there is a $30 annual compliance fee per vehicle reported. Vehicles will also be required to perform periodic emissions testing starting in 2024. Starting in 2025, the periodic emission test is a biannual test. Then in 2027, vehicles with an OBD will be required to test quarterly. On-road ag equipment and motorhomes subject to Clean Truck Check will be required to perform emissions testing annually. Next slide, please. Only credentialed Clean Truck Check testers can perform compliance tests unless it is an OBD test submitted via a telematics service provider using a CARB verified OBD test device. Anyone with the right tools can become a credentialed tester once they've completed a short free online training course and score a minimum 80% on an accompanying exam. For trucks that are newer than 2013, only equipment required is a CARB-approved OBD test device. The list of testers who want to be listed publicly is available on the Clean Truck Check program webpage. Next slide, please. For Clean Truck Check, here's a list of contact and some detailed information I provided for you. If you'd like to learn more, please check out the websites listed on this page, and feel free to ask any questions about anything on this presentation regarding Clean Truck Check or state and local government fleets. Next slide, please. So this slide includes some resources on the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. These are really well thought out resources. So the Advanced Clean Fleets homepage, the link is provided there. As I mentioned throughout this presentation, we have multiple fact sheets on the Advanced Clean Fleet regulations. We keep updating those fact sheets. We also have a searchable FAQ, a fleet calculator. You can find all those on the Advanced Clean Fleets main website, but the links are also provided here on this slide. As I mentioned in the beginning of this training, the Advanced Clean Fleets email is zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. If you have any questions, if any of your questions were not answered, feel free to email us there. Next, we have the ZEV Truck Stop homepage. Very well put together homepage on ZEV Truck Stop. If, as Chris mentioned, the HVIP catalog is on that page. We have a lot of information if you're looking at zero emission vehicles, including incentives and funding. I highly recommend you bookmark that page and go off to it often. It's always up to date. Lastly, the hotline 1-866-634-3735. If you have any questions and would like to reach us by phone, feel free to contact us there. Next slide, please. So we have until 11 o'clock. Feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A. The next part of this presentation, I'll hand it over to Brandon to go over some of the submitted questions, and we'll go from there.
I think our supervisor, Bruce Tudor, wants to say a few words. He's been looking through the Q&As as well.
Thank you, Brandon. I just want to kind of hammer home a point on ACF and Clean Truck Check. I think this presentation did a very good job of providing the information on these two and that they are different. However, we hear a lot of confusion out in the field when we're out talking to folks. Just so that you know, again, just to kind of reiterate this, these two are not parts of the same regulation. Clean Truck Check is not part of ACF. And in addition, and maybe the biggest thing, is there are two separate reporting systems. It's not something we typically want to do, create multiple systems. However, with Clean Truck Check, because it is integrating directly with the Department of Motor Vehicles registration databases, we did end up having to do that. So again, out in the field, I get a lot of folks who will say, oh, I signed up for, I reported my trucks already. I reported them for this. Typically, people call it the $30 program, which is what it costs per vehicle to register in Clean Truck Check. But then the next thing I have to ask them is, okay, but did you also register for Advanced Clean Fleet if they're subject to it? We especially get that with drayage fleets because all those small fleets are subject. So as I said, just want to make sure that you know that if you've registered for one, that doesn't mean that you're registered for the other, and that again, they are separate programs. But we did want to bring you that information today because it is, even though this is about Advanced Clean Fleets, specifically state and local governments, it is critical. And as I said, we wanted to bring you that information today. All right, with that, thank you, Brandon, for letting me barge in. Brandon, back to you for Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks, Bruce, for that. I think that's helpful clarification for everybody. Okay, so let me jump back over. I have the list of the pre-submitted questions that we've sort of gone through. We'll run through those. I've added in just a handful of the live Q&A we've been getting as well, where they really generally apply everywhere. So we'll bring Chris back on and we will run through the second half of these. And then if you have any clean truck questions, we'll have Duncan come on once we run through these and run through some of those questions as well. All right, Chris, are you ready?
Yeah, my camera's having some issues, so give me just a second here.
Oh, no.
Or you can go ahead and I can answer as the camera comes on.
So there's some of these are a mix, but let me start with some of the, can you maybe say a word about the low use exemption, the 1,000-mile low use? We had a lot of sort of questions wondering how that worked. Did they include the vehicles in the calculations? Do they report those low use vehicles into trackers? Two questions there. We'll start with that.
So the term low use is a little bit of a loaded term since multiple regulations have used those in the past. Considering that we're talking with public agencies, they're probably referencing the public agency and utility regulation low use, which was a 3,000-mile limit for that regulation. For ACF, we do not have a low use provision. We have a backup vehicle provision, and that provision allows any vehicle that travels less than 1,000 total miles per year to be exempt from the regulation, but they are required to be reported, and you have to update your odometer reading with us annually for those. So if you were previously under low use for PAU, the PAU regulation does not go away. It's in effect at the same time as this regulation is. So if your vehicle did not need to be upgraded with a PM filter because it was low use, you can continue to not have to upgrade it with a PM filter by continuing to stay under 3,000 miles a year for the PAU regulation. However, it does, again, as mentioned, does not exempt you from ACF. So you would have to, in order for you to get exempt from ACF, you would have to keep it under 1,000 miles a year and report it in truckers as a backup vehicle in order for that to work. So that's pretty much how the low use interacts with the ACF's backup vehicle provision.
And so can you maybe clarify, we saw a few questions. You have the public agency and utility rule, and then you have the truck and bus rule, and then you have the ACF. And you touched, could you maybe explain for our state and local government fleets how does the truck and bus rule interact with ACF? If you have let's say a 2010 or newer?
Yeah, so the truck and bus rule doesn't generally apply to state or local government agencies. It does apply to private and federal agencies, but in general, that also had a low use provision, which allowed vehicles that travel less than 1,000 miles per year in the state with unlimited miles outside of the state to be reported as a backup vehicle as well. They had to report those vehicles in the trucker system as a low use vehicle. However, again, truck and bus is in effect at the same time as ACF. So if you're having difficulty and you don't know which option to select, please email truckers@arb.ca.gov. But generally, if you're looking to get a vehicle into the ACF provisions backup vehicle, you would need to report it as a backup vehicle in truckers.
Backup vehicles. And then I think you said this, but so it's clear, if you have an old internal combustion vehicle with a filter on it and that you filtered under that PAU rule, can you still keep operating that vehicle? Sort of question.
You can, so under the so again, it's a complex answer.
Or under milestones option, right?
Right.
Choose to comply with ACF.
Exactly. So it depends on the compliance option you select. So it's either, if you're picking the default ZEV purchase schedule, your existing vehicles can continue to operate as long as you want. You don't have to get rid of them at all. Under the ZEV milestones option, your existing vehicles will eventually have to be retired as you come up to the 100% requirements for the ZEV milestones option. In order for your existing vehicles to continue to be allowed to operate under either one of those options, they have to be compliant with any other regulations that are in effect, which includes the PAU regulations. So if you are compliant with PAU, you have a PM filter on the vehicle, or it's low use under the PAU's regulation, you can continue operating it in California until you need to either upgrade it per ZEV milestones or until it's retired if you're using the ZEV purchase schedule.
Thank you. I think that really helps keep it clear for everybody. Let me jump back over some of the questions. This one we touched on quite a bit, but we'll hit it one more time. If manufacturers don't make a truck that is currently needed or available, would an agency still need to offset the purchase with a ZEV? Is this considered the basis for an exemption?
So if a manufacturer is not making a vehicle that you need, in terms of the regulations requirements, you have to be replacing a vehicle that's at least 13 years old in order to qualify for a ZEV purchase exemption. And the purpose of that exemption is for situations where a manufacturer is not making a vehicle in a configuration that you need. And so I guess do you mind repeating the question one more time? Because I'm not sure if I'm hitting all points.
I think we hit on most of it. Let's keep going. It's basically, hey, what is if the vehicle's not being manufactured, do I have to purchase it?
So yeah, like if it's not being manufactured, you could qualify for a ZEV purchase exemption. You could ask, but you would have to be replacing a vehicle. Exemptions are not for fleet expansions, so that's something, another common question that we get. So if you're just expanding your fleet or you're trying to do new service or hire more people and the vehicle you need isn't available as a ZEV, that's not a basis for an exemption. It's only, again, when replacing a vehicle. So yeah, I would say that if the vehicle is not available and you want to purchase it as a combustion vehicle, then you would need to offset that combustion purchase with a ZEV purchase to meet the 50% requirement.
We'll have some more Q&A. We can touch on that, and people can always email us if they're confused about their real specific situation too. All right, let's get to, we have some easier ones. We have the question about the 5-day pass. How does the 5-day pass work for trucks passing by California for a day or two, and how is this monitored or reported?
So state and local government fleets generally don't have access to the 5-day pass just since it's not necessary for, as most state and local government fleets are based in California and operate here and don't go out of state. But for any private fleets that are asking about 5-day pass, generally you would need to apply for the pass 5 days in advance of your planned entry. You would submit the request online through the trucker system. And it's basically automatically granted if you've not claimed a pass for that vehicle in the calendar year yet. So it's effectively automatically granted, but you do have to apply 5 days in advance of your planned entry.
Perfect. So it really doesn't, not something that does not apply to folks here are probably not going to use it in today's session. Have some of these are a little odd, so I'll try to, some of the questions are odd, but let me go through them. This one was about offsetting your ZEV purchases. Maybe you understand this a little more than I do. What is the purpose of an exemption if we still need to offset with a ZEV purchase? Could you maybe clarify what that is maybe referring to?
Yeah, let me see. Was that question number 8 there? Yeah. Okay, so generally exemptions are for situations, again, that are outside of the fleet owner's control. If the fleet owner is purchasing vehicles during a calendar year and half are available as ZEVs and half are not, the exemption is not necessary because the fleet can comply by purchasing half of their purchases that year as ZEVs and purchase the other half as combustion. The regulation allows the flexibility to do that. If nothing you're purchasing during the calendar year is available as a ZEV, then there's a basis for an exemption as the fleet can't comply with the regulation. So you could purchase half of your purchases that year as combustion, apply for exemptions for the other half to purchase combustion as well. And that would help you remain in compliance with the year. So again, exemptions are generally for situations outside the fleet owner's control. If there's opportunities for the fleet owner to comply using the existing structure of the regulation, then exemptions are not necessary.
Then a question about the specialty exemption. It is, what will be the process by which CARB authorizes public agency utilities to purchase replacements for traditional utility specialized vehicles that are at the end of the useful life needed to maintain reliable service that respond to major foreseeable events, including but not limited weather, wildfires, disasters, and physical attacks.
Yeah, so this is language taken directly out of the AB 1594 bill, and the process by which we will authorize will be determined in the rulemaking process. So if there's any questions about 1594 in general, the short answer is we don't know yet. We haven't started the rulemaking process. It will require a amendment and full public rulemaking process for advanced clean fleets. I believe that we're planning on starting on that sometime early this year. But again, typical rulemaking process usually takes 1 to 2 years before we get to the board and then additional time to implement. So in terms of what exactly we're doing in terms of this bill is still open for discussion and for part of the public rulemaking process. So yeah.
No, that's it. I read the bill. I did not catch that was the language right out of it. So I stumbled onto that. I was going to talk about 1594 a little bit later, but there was a couple of submitted questions, and I'll be honest, I didn't fully understand exactly what they were meaning, but I think you do, Chris, because you're doing it day to day. It was about the process of developing each utility's technical and performance requirements. Is that what we're talking about, developing through that rulemaking process?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. Okay, let me go back up here. So here's I had a question about sort of engine replacements, failed engines. And this one was, is an engine that failed considered beyond the fleet owner's control for an exemption?
So as we mentioned before, replacing an engine, not a whole vehicle, just an engine, is not considered a new vehicle purchase. So if you're on the ZEV purchase schedule, this kind of repair or engine replacement can be done without needing to request an exemption. So you can just do that without having to come to us and ask for permission.
And then I had one that was from the Q&A I wanted to ask you that I think is fairly straightforward. Is there an exemption to, say, a construction company fleet that does not have a home base to charge?
Unfortunately not. If you want an overview of all the exemptions and extensions, I dropped a link to the exemption and extension overview fact sheet, but right now the regulation does not have any exemptions specifically for not having a home base to charge.
Okay, and then the next I have, I pulled out the reporting questions. We've touched some of these that were submitted a little. I think Yusuf really did touch on them in the presentation, but we'll run through them just so it's clear. This first one, I don't know if we will go here, but are there any templates for the annual 30-day reports? And so this, do you think this is talking about like the mass upload tool for truckers?
30-day reports.
So
So
we
to,
like
to
if
me,
you
this
want
is probably talking about the daily usage exemption, because the daily usage exemption requires 30 days of fleet's mileage and daily usage be reported to us. Right now, we don't have any templates for that. We are working on developing some fact sheets and templates for that provision because it requires fleets to already have 10% of their fleet as ZEVs to even apply. That one is a little bit lower priority than some of the other exemptions that could be applied for now because we aren't aware of any fleets that have already met the 10% requirement. So we've kind of put that off just a little bit, but we are still working on that. Hopefully should have something out within the next couple months here.
Another question, it says for annual reporting, will there be a vehicle body type list and a powertrain type list?
Say that one more time for.
Because for the reporting, will there be a vehicle body type list and a powertrain type list? And I wasn't sure. These two, I wasn't sure if they were asking about like just a general, hey, there's no vehicles available.
I'm assuming they're talking about just general reporting here. So in truckers, we do have a vehicle type drop-down list, so you can pick whichever option most closely represents your vehicle. We also have, you said powertrain. So we also have a fuel type drop-down list, which effectively implies the powertrain. If you pick gasoline, diesel, natural gas, of course, those are going to be combustion powertrains. If you pick hybrid, that's a hybrid powertrain. If you pick fuel cell, that's a fuel cell powertrain. So just select whatever fuel type selection in truckers most closely applies.
Okay. And then I have a number of questions about adding or removing vehicles in the reporting system. This one is under the regulation, it indicates that annual report should include the date the vehicle was added or removed from the California fleet. Does this mean we need to continue to report vehicles no longer in the fleet from January 1st, 2024 until the report is no longer required?
So all you would do is if you removed a vehicle from the fleet, you would just indicate that one time within 30 days that it was removed. After that, truckers will the truckers reporting system will maintain that vehicle as a deleted vehicle in your account, so you don't have to like take any action in future years with that. You just delete it once and then you're done.
The next one is if a vehicle has been declared surplus by our governing board and is pending to be sold, does it need to be included in the annual reporting, or would it be considered removed from the fleet?
Yeah, so the regulation does exempt vehicles that are defined as vehicles awaiting sale. And if you give me just a second here, I'll pull that up. So a vehicle that's awaiting sale means a vehicle in the possession of a dealer, financing company, private party, or other entity that does not intend to operate the vehicle in California or offer it for hire or operation in California. And the vehicle is operated only to demonstrate functionality to potential buyers, to move short distances to make repairs, or for maintenance or storage. It does include new vehicles when driven to be delivered to the fleet owner. So generally, that means that I think a common situation is that public entities may consign their vehicles to auction houses to be sold when they're done using them. So as soon as you stop using it in California and you transfer that to an auction house, then we would consider that a vehicle awaiting sale. Just generally, any entity that is not intending to operate the vehicle and is intending to sell it, we would consider a vehicle awaiting sale. So at that point, once you become aware that you are no longer going to use the vehicle, it's effectively removed from your California fleet. You would report it as removed within 30 days of you stop using it. And then until it's sold, we would consider it a vehicle awaiting sale. And so you wouldn't have to report or do any other compliance calculations based on including that vehicle.
Then we actually saw a couple of these as I was going through the questions. It says if exempt vehicles are already reported, on our list, so I assume into truckers, should we remove them? Like for example, a fire truck?
Yeah, you should remove them because otherwise the system is going to think that they're a compliant vehicle and possibly include them in your fleet count. So if you have any vehicles that meet the exempt vehicle definitions, such as, you know, fire trucks or police vehicles that are already reported, I would remove them from your trucker's account.
Perfect, thanks for that. And then a couple questions on odometer readings. Do we include the odometer reading information for backup vehicles in the annual report? Is it supposed to be reported separately? If separately, what is the date it needs to be reported? And let me go ahead and ask the second one here. Can the odometer reading for backup vehicles be another date other than January 1st, as this is a holiday for our fleet? Why don't we start with that one first? Does the January 1st date have to be January 1st since it's New Year's Day?
The regulation specifies January 1st, so January 1st is the day. But I mean, you know, if you know that your whole workforce is going to be off on January 1st, then take the reading on December 31st or December 30th or anytime the week before or the week after if you know the vehicle hasn't been operated since January 1st. So yeah, I mean, it should be fairly easy to get a January 1st reading, even if that particular day is a holiday.
That is what the rule says. So it is
Yeah,
January.
and it is what the regulation specifies.
And then the second one, do we include the odometer reading for backup vehicles in the annual reporting?
Yes. So if you have any vehicles that are designated as backup, you must report their odometer readings annually.
And then the second part, the third part that was what is the date it needs to be reported? So would that be due for April 1st, or is that a January 31st? If you opt into the milestone options as an SLG fleet, when do you report?
So if you're a government fleet and you're using the default ZEV purchase schedule, the default one requires you report by April 1st of each year. So you would report the January 1 reading on April 1st of each year. If you are using the ZEV the ZEV milestones option, that one has a reporting deadline of February 1st each year. So you again would report on February 1st or before February 1st, the January 1 reading from that year.
Perfect, thanks for that. And then this is the last, a couple of more on here. This is about emergency mileage. Does emergency mileage reporting apply to backup vehicles only or any vehicle used in emergency operations?
Emergency mileage reporting only applies because it's only relevant to backup vehicles. Other vehicles that are used in emergency operations but aren't backup vehicles still have to comply with the regulation. If they are a backup vehicle and they do more than 1,000 miles each year, but any mileage over 1,000 each year is all emergency miles, then you need to report the emergency miles. And keep in mind that the emergency miles are as defined in the regulation. They're not just anybody's, definition of what emergency means. The regulation does define emergency operations as those to respond to declared emergency events. So this would not be like a water main breaks and nobody declared it an emergency. I'm going to go out and use those as emergency miles. This would be like, there's a major fire. The governor of California declares an emergency event. I need to go send vehicles to help operate. Those are considered the emergency miles.
So yeah, emergency is usually not what sort of a vehicle's routine operations.
Right.
To use for it. Okay. And then when is a fleet required to report those emergency miles?
That'll be at the same time that you're reporting your odometer reading. So you'll report your odometer reading, any accumulated emergency miles, and as long as the total number is less than 1,000 for the remaining product, then that's what you'll.
Good to go. I'll show you as compliant. Okay. Yeah, be careful. That's my commentary. Make sure you put your odometer readings in correct the first time when you're in truckers. And okay, so here's just a couple that came in that were related to this. I thought it was worth sort of asking for everybody to hear. Changes in the fleet. I saw a number of questions in the Q&A about that. Do changes in the fleet need to be reported within 30 days? Is that of receipt or of issuing a purchase order? Could you give maybe a little commentary on what the reporting changes means?
Yeah, so the regulation specifies that fleet owners must comply with the following reporting requirements when adding or removing a vehicle from the California fleet. So if you've added a vehicle to the California fleet, it has to be reported within 30 days of being added to the fleet. when we say added to the fleet, that means placed in operation. Technically, the California fleet definition covers this by defining the California fleet as the subset of vehicles in the total fleet that are operated in California during a calendar year. So once you start operating that vehicle in California, it's considered added to the California fleet and therefore should be reported within 30 days. If you just placed a purchase order and you don't have the vehicle yet, or you won't get it for a couple of years, you don't need to report it until you get it and start operating it. You're also required to report vehicles that are permanently removed from the California fleet within 30 days. So, you know, selling it, scrapping it, permanently transferring it out of state, we would want you to report within 30 days of those actions occurring. If a backup vehicle exceeds its allowed mileage limit, then that has to be reported within 30 days. And if you convert a vehicle to a ZEV, that has to be reported within 30 days.
Perfect. And then let me read this to you. It says, for reporting fleet changes, the term fleet changes only applies to the definitions of gross vehicle weight rating greater than 8,500 pounds, or does that definition include every vehicle once on the milestones option?
Yeah, so the regulation requirements, reporting, compliance, pretty much everything only applies to vehicles described in the vehicle scope. So you can think of the vehicle scope as kind of the gateway in a way to what applies to the regulation and what the regulation's requirements apply to. So if you have any vehicles that aren't included in the vehicle scope, in other words, light duty vehicles that are not light duty package delivery vehicles, the changes to the fleet and reporting in general does not apply to those vehicles.
And then here's one more. This is us swapping back and forth. Can fleets switch between the default and milestone schedules, or I should say between the purchase schedule and the milestone schedules as many times as they like before 2030? The answer to that is no.
Private fleets can, but government fleets cannot. So for government fleets, the regulation language does specify that you would have to permanently opt into the ZEV milestones option. Now, because we have a little bit of leeway and flexibility with the EPA waiver and the reporting requirements, it's still up in the air, probably at least until April 1st for government fleets. So if you picked milestones and you didn't mean to, you can probably switch back before April 1st. But come April 1st, it's likely that the compliance option will be locked in at that point. So definitely, if you've double check what you've reported and make sure that you have selected the reporting option that you are intending to use, because again, for government fleets, it is a permanent opt-in to the ZEV milestones option. You cannot switch back to the ZEV purchase schedule once you've opted into milestones.
All right, so those are sort of the main ones I had flagged from on the reporting. So I have maybe 5 or 6 questions that we've seen that I thought were worthwhile for everybody to hear. But they're sort of a little bit random across the board. But I wanted to, there was a number of questions about the incentives. So the first one is, I've heard that if we use government grants to offset the initial ZEV cost, then they are not available to be used in the ACF calculations. Is this true? Right. So how are we handling incentive funded trucks in the ACF calculations?
I can take that if you'd like, Brandon.
Yeah,
Sure.
go. So I can answer it. Go for it.
I could tell it's like, okay, somebody, no, that's not completely correct. Here's the way it works. You can get incentives for a vehicle and use that vehicle to comply with the regulation as long as you get it before your compliance period. Now, I know that's a little complicated, so here's what I mean by that. Let's say it's 2027 and you have a compliance obligation in 2027. Let's say you have a compliance obligation of adding, you're using milestone, you have to add 10 vehicles, okay? If you had gotten incentives the year before for vehicles and purchased those vehicles, you could use those in your fleet percentage calculation. If it's now, again, 2027, you need 10 more vehicles, you cannot get incentives in 2027 to meet that, those 10 additional vehicles. However, let's say you wanted to get 20 vehicles that year. You could purchase the 10 without incentives and then get incentive fundings for another 10 vehicles. So again, you cannot use the incentives to fulfill what I'm going to call a current compliance obligation, but as long as you're ahead of it, you can use those funding programs.
So Bruce, I guess just generally for everybody's benefit, the ACF regulation ultimately defers to each funding program's
Right.
guidelines. So Bruce, are you saying that each funding program has indicated that they would allow a funded vehicle?
You know,
Or
and
at
I'm
this
glad you
point-
brought. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, Chris. There are a couple of funding programs I'm not certain about, Moyer and VW being specific to those. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm so focused on HVIP. HVIP is the main funding program, and there's a carve out of HVIP called ISEF, which might actually be applicable to some of the small counties here. That funding program does not have any requirements. I don't know. There's been some discussions with others, and I see Anne Marie on. She may be more in tune with those.
Yeah, I just want to say we are trying to clarify this for everyone, and we are very close to a fact sheet that we will release that will have all this information on all the various funding programs that CARB has and how they interact with ACF. So we know there are a lot of questions about this, and we're doing our best to make sure that the fact sheet is clear and answers everyone's questions. So it should be coming out in the next couple weeks.
Right. The main funding pot, though, HVIP, you can refer back to, or look back at what I said a moment ago. It is those other funding pots that need some clarification.
And then the other question about incentives is basically, hey, are there incentives available? Right. And the answer to that is yes, there's millions of dollars of incentives available as well. Okay, thank you, Bruce, for that. Chris, I was just scrolling through some of the Q&A that's come in. Could you maybe give a word or two about different divisions, subdivisions within an organization and how they can choose to report? That can be a little bit of a tricky area for folks.
Yeah, so the regulation specifies that there is an option to comply jointly, but that implies that you would need to report and comply separately for each division or department within a larger within a larger government structure. So for example, if you had a county government who might have a public works department, a wastewater department, a transit entity within the county's overall structure, each one of those individual fleets would be required by the regulation to report separately. There is an option where if the fleets wanted to join together and calculate compliance across multiple fleets, whether using the purchase schedule or the ZEV milestones option, fleets can do that. But when you're reporting, you would need to indicate a parent trucker's ID number in the company information page. And so you would, in this example that I just gave, the transit, public works, and wastewater divisions would all report the county's trucker's ID number as the parent if they all wanted to join together and use the same compliance option. Generally, this compliance option joining is for the ZEV milestones option. For the purchase provision, it actually doesn't really matter because it's just based on, again, the total number of purchases that are made during the calendar year. But yeah, so there is an option to comply jointly, but the default is that you report and comply separately for each division or department within a larger government structure.
Thank you for that. So a couple of more random questions. This one, I think, this is a good one. I find it. Our sweeper and refuse trucks are privately contracted. Does the city have any responsibility to report compliance on these? So you can touch on, hey, if we're contracting out our refuse service or our sweeper services, how does that get handled under the rule?
Yeah, so if you're using the default ZEV purchase schedule, then you would not need to report those vehicles since they would be owned and operated by these other fleets. Generally, even if you're using the ZEV milestones option, you would also not report these vehicles unless they were considered under your common ownership or control. That's a nuance that doesn't apply to most government fleets. However, if you do need some information, we could probably get somebody to drop the link to the common ownership or control fact sheet in the chat in case anyone needs to look at it. But if you're not directing the day-to-day operations of those refuse vehicles or the street sweepers, you're not saying when and where you have to go, what trucks to use, every day, you know, dispatching individual vehicles, then you're generally not considered under common ownership control of those vehicles and would not need to report them. They would just, whoever owns them would need to report. So the waste management company or the street sweeper company would report those.
Question. So here's a question on the milestone requirement. It says if we order a truck in 2029 to meet the 2030 requirement, but it does not get delivered until 2031, does it count as meeting the intent of the milestone requirement?
No. So the milestones provision does require that the ZEVs be in your fleet, in the California fleet, basically in operation, so received effectively by the milestone date. There is a protection in there if you're using milestones option called the vehicle delivery delay provision. What that does is if you ordered a ZEV at least 1 year ahead of your deadline, so you know you got a deadline coming up in 25, you place your order no later than January 1 of 24. And if the ZEV takes longer than a year to be built and delivered, then you're protected using this vehicle delivery delay extension. However, if you don't order the vehicle within that year time frame, you run the risk of being out of compliance if the vehicle is not delivered by the milestone deadline.
And then this one, that certainly applies, but not as much of what we saw last month and some of our other training. But what about renting and leasing vehicles? And it said, what about, so there's a couple parts. It said, let me look at it, sorry. What about renting or leasing a vehicle as a replacement vehicle while we wait for budget or delivery of a solid purchase? So yeah, why don't you just give a little overview of the leasing provisions? I think that will answer it.
Sure. So for rental and leased vehicles, generally we assign compliance and reporting responsibility to the entity that we determine to be the fleet owner. We put forward a definition of fleet owner in the regulation. Subpart B of that definition covers leasing and renting vehicles, and generally leased or rented vehicles are considered the responsibility of the renting or leasing entity. So if you go to Ryder, Penske, or Enterprise, generally it's going to be Penske, Ryder, or Enterprise. However, if the lease or rental is for a period of 1 year or longer, and the rental or leasing contract specifies that you, the renting operator or lessee of the vehicle, is the party responsible for compliance with state laws. So check your contract for that language. If it's for a year longer and that contract language is there, then you are responsible for that vehicle. So you would need to report it and comply with it as if it was part of your fleet. So we kind of draw that line again at the 1 year mark, and it has to have the contract language assigning that responsibility to you as the lessee.
And then I think we touched on it earlier, but we're talking about leasing. If you have a leasing vehicle and you extend the contract, does that count as a purchase? Oh, I think you got over mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. If you're extending the lease, no. Even lease buyouts are actually not considered a new vehicle purchase. So if you have the vehicle in your fleet and then you're buying it out at the end of a 3 or 5 year lease, then we're not going to consider that a new addition since you've effectively been operating the same vehicle. And again, like Brandon mentioned, if you're just renewing the vehicle lease for the same vehicle, not for a different vehicle, then we would not consider that a new purchase.
We haven't really touched on it a little bit, but I flagged this. It says we do not control or commonly own any other vehicles. Does that mean we are not subject to the ACF regulation? Right. So if a fleet doesn't own any vehicles and they don't control any vehicles, what
if they don't own any, if all of what you use are leased or rentals that are not considered your responsibility per what we just talked about, and you don't control any vehicles, then you are likely not subject to ACF's requirements.
And if somebody's out there in those sort of situations, feel free to shoot us an email at the ZEV Fleet email. We'll take a look more closely at your specific situation.
Yeah.
Those are the main ones I had. We had a number of comments today about enforcement. How will you enforce the rule? Chris, do you want to give a word or two about that?
Sure. So all CARB regulations are enforced pursuant to CARB's posted enforcement policy. I'm not sure if somebody's available. Could you post into the chat the link to CARB's enforcement policy? If you have any questions about how the regulations enforced or how any other CARB regulations are enforced, please see that webpage. I'm sorry. There's one other clarification there. Whoever's posting that link to the enforcement page, can you also post a link to the ACF enforcement notice? Because we did recently, due to the fact that we do not yet have a US EPA waiver to enforce the regulation, certain requirements are being delayed for private and federal fleets. However, state and local government fleet requirements are still in full effect. So for most people here, this isn't really going to matter, but if you are a federal fleet or a private fleet, take a look at this enforcement discretion notice that someone will post in the chat.
So those are the main things I had flagged. As we've been talking, it's been a challenge to try to run through some of these. Any other questions coming through? Duncan, do you want to come on? Duncan is our clean truck check trainer and expert. Do you want to come on? Have you been seeing any really good questions that you think everybody needs to know about? I saw some about the payment systems for clean truck check. Anything to share with everybody that's real key?
Yeah, there's some common questions that are definitely very important. The first of which is there's been an extension granted until January 31st for reporting and fees for 2023. So any vehicles from last year that operated in California need to be reported into the Clean Truck Check Vehicle Inspection System database and have their compliance fee paid currently by the end of the month. There are methods to take information from truckers and do a facilitated download and then upload into CTC Viz. Unfortunately, they are two separate systems, as we said earlier, and you do have to download from one and upload into the other. For fee payments, the current fee payment structure are credit and debit card or e-check. For credit and debit cards, there is an additional processing fee. E-checks, there is no additional processing fee. CalCard should be included in the accepted methods of payment, as Visa is the payment processor for CalCard. The next part is exactly what is subject to Clean Truck Check. There's a very short list of exemptions on our website. If you just go to arb.ca.gov/clean truck check, there's a very short list, very easy to find. And you'll be able to see what is not subject to Clean Truck Check. In general, it is emergency vehicles, deployable military vehicles, that sort of thing. Also, zero emission vehicles are not subject to Clean Truck Check. The other big question we get asked over and over is when do we need to start our emissions compliance testing? Currently, if you test now, your test would be considered valid for the rest of the year for 2024. You don't have to go out and do it right away, though. Emissions testing is scheduled to start no earlier than July and is based on the DMV renewal date for vehicles that have a standard yearly DMV renewal. So if your renewal date is July or after, that will be your emissions testing date. If your renewal is before July, your emissions testing date would be 6 months after your listed date for 2024. So as an example, if your renewal date is February 5th, your new renewal date would be August 5th for your Clean Truck Check emissions control test. For VIN, for vehicles that do not go through the standard registration system, or for out-of-state vehicles, they're based on the VIN of each vehicle, and there's a handy chart on our website. Once again, anything listed before July, just add 6 months. And in general, that's the standard questions. The other one is, just to reiterate what vehicles are subject to clean truck check, it's all non-gasoline vehicles over 14,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. So municipal buses, school buses, big rigs, all of those are all under clean truck check. And I'll keep answering questions in the Q&A. And if we start to get the same ones popping up again, I'll chime in and see if we need to say it verbally so more people get the information. You're still muted, Brandon.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Duncan. It's always good to have that little commentary, what people have been putting in and help them out. So that's, I think, everything. Yusuf, do you want to come back on? And we're wrapping things up for the day.
Yes, thank you, Brandon. Bruce, want me to hand it off to you?
To you, Yusuf.
Yeah, go for it, Bruce.
Okay. All right. Thank you, both of you. And Yusuf, Chris, Brandon, and everybody behind the scenes. Thank you so much. We got a number of comments about, some great information. We appreciate that. We tried to answer as many questions as we could today. There are a number still open in chat or in the Q&A. What we will try and do is answer those, and then we can send those, we can send that set of answers to everyone that signed up. So you'll still see those as long as they are applicable to this, to today's presentation. So having said that, want to thank everybody online for joining us. As I noted early this morning, there are recordings of this webinar will be up, and of other sections of the regulation. So with that, I will let you go have lunch. And again, thank you. Goodbye.